billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Dear friends, welcome to Idea Foundation Forum. Today we will discuss the research topic People's Power to Get Rid of Elitist Subjugation. As a part of the main topic, People's Power can reverse the Muslims' decadence. While analyzing the reasons of Muslims' decadence in lectures 125 to 137, major factor found behind these reasons was the elitist subjugation of deprived majorities of the Muslim populations throughout their history. The suffering majorities remained passively inactive, silent against the exploitative elitist rule orchestrated mostly by family or tribe-based monarchies and oligarchies with the connivance of religious and wealthy elites. Docile majorities hardly ever challenged the status quo due to either ignorance of their latent strength and rights or fearing elitist reprisals or greed of petty interests, except a few short-lived upheavals in the recent times. It not only kept them impoverished, but it also kept the Muslim societies deprived of intellectual growth, pluralistic and inclusive institutions, and emerging innovative socio-economic and political opportunities. As we saw in lectures 141 and 143, despite the fact that Islam had provided a set of fundamental principles for protection of human rights and socio-economic and political reformations, these principles could neither be converted into a workable legal framework for peaceful transfer of power and socio-economic justice, equity, peace, and progress, nor any commendable people's movement could ever be witnessed to this end. While, on the other hand, the peoples of the Western world took a course of perpetual movement, starting from the Magna Carta process in 1215 for establishing more and more representative governments, inclusive institutions, and pluralistic mode of governance. Daron A. Smoglu and James A. Robinson, in their book Why Nations Fail, have carried out a detailed analysis of facts spanned over centuries to find out causes of success or failure of several countries. Their study has proved that the countries where mass movements of the peoples led their societies to become just, participative, pluralistic, and open to public scrutiny, and build inclusive and merit-based economic institutions, could get higher socio-economic dividend. The nations which failed in taking this path failed badly, if not entirely, in gaining good governance and economic well-being for their citizens. Stark majority of these unfortunate nations fall in the Muslim world. Unfortunately. The most glaring reason of their failure is that the majorities of populations remained stuck up in the trap of determinism, intellectual stagnation, and intolerant sectarianism, and leaving their captaincy to the politico-religious elites who had maliciously designed this trap against the verses of qur'an. Thus, the center of our discussion today is how people's power can get rid of elitist subjugation to move on the broad way of faith, progress, peace, and freedom by pursuing instructions of the Qur'an. Dear friends, let us begin with the Quranic message on destiny of a nation and role of its people in changing the destiny with their individual and collective efforts. I will quote two verses in this respect. Ayat 11 of Surah Ar-Ra'd says, listen, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Translation is, indeed, Allah will not change the condition of a people, of a nation, until they change what is in themselves. They means the people, the masses, the public. Ayat 53 of Surah Al-Anfal says, listen, ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّ اللَّهَ لَمْ يَكُ مُغَيِّرًا نِعْمَةً أَنْعَمَهَا عَلَى قَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ وَأَنَّ اللَّهَ سَمِيعٌ عَلِيمٌ. Because Allah will never change the grace which He has bestowed on a people until they change what is in their own souls, and verily Allah is He who hears and knows all the things. Now, my dear friends, please note what the Quranic message is. This is question. What is the message? These Quranic statements or Quranic message negates, rejects the misleading concept of destiny or determinism propagated by the politico-religious elites to deprive the people of their abilities of intellectual growth, promotion of knowledge, and innovative pursuits, engagements. I may refer to the determinist, rustic mindset of the politico-religious elites under the Ottoman Empire, who kept on obstructing free use of printing press till the close of 18th century, while it had been freely operational in various cities of Europe since 1445, when it was invented in a German city of Mainz. What was the consequences? The consequences that the Muslims had to bear was that in 1800, only 2 to 3%, maximum 3% of the citizens of the Ottoman Empire were literate. And imagine, 97 were illiterate, compared with 60% of adult males and 40% females in England. Now imagine the difference. Second message is that if we want to transform our nation or ummah for a positive change, we will have to reform our own characters in line with our role of vicegerent of Allah that primarily urges, requires, demands, urges us to be united for the truth. Interests of the masses have been subjugated by the politico-religious elites, then how they can be custodians of our interests? $1 million question, isn't it? Let me listen your answer. We must know our interests well. We must know enemies of our interests and our unity very well. And we must stand steadfast against the divisive, conflict-ridden forces which are enemies of collective well-being of the humanity. So, dear friends, under the purpose of his creation and the role of his vicegerent, as detailed in Lecture 3, the man is obliged to establish a society where submission to the will of Allah, internal unity, progress, justice, and collective well-being could be the most accredited, important features of governance, essential features of governance. For that, all the individuals, every citizen of the nation are obliged to move together willfully, forcefully, and vocally to achieve the said purpose. Silence, indifference, or neglect to this obligation warrants severe accountability on the day of judgment. As I have mentioned some verses of Qur'an on the screen. Quranic direction for unity of the Muslims is very strong. Quranic direction for unity of the Muslims is very strong, leaving no room for divisive slogans of sectarianism invented by the enemies of Islam to divide and weaken the Muslims to serve their own devilish interests. For that, focusing on the Quran is bonding force for unity of the Muslims. وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. The Quran surely brings the believers from ignorance to wisdom, from weakness to strength. وَيُخْرِجُهُمْ مِنَ الظُّلُمَاتِ إِلَى النُّورِ وَيُخْرِجُهُمْ مِنَ الظُّلُمَاتِ إِلَى النُّورِ. I will request to revisit Lecture 127 in this respect. Here I quote a few verses which, if appropriately and honestly understood, can save Muslim community from sinful and extremely harmful sectarian acts. Ayat 103 of Surah Al Imran says, listen, and hold firmly to the rope of Allah. What is rope of Allah? The Quran. And hold firmly to the rope of Allah all together. Everyone, all of them, all of us. And hold firmly to the rope of Allah all together and do not become divided. And remember the favor of Allah upon you when you were enemies, and He brought your hearts together, and you became, by His favor, brothers. And you were on the edge of a pit of the fire, and He saved you from it. Thus, does Allah make clear to you His verses that you may be guided. Ayat 10 of Surah Al-Hujurat says, the believers are but brothers. They are brothers. So make settlement between your brothers and fear Allah that you may receive mercy. Besides the unity among the Muslims, Allah has also desired unity among the people globally by pursuing the divine message of Quran to ensure peace and prosperity for the whole mankind as revealed in ayat 15 and 16 of Surah Al-Ma'idah in the words, O people of the scripture. Who are the people of the scripture? Jews and Christians other than Muslims. O people of the scripture, there has come to you our messenger, making clear to you much of what you used to conceal of the scripture and overlooking much. There has come to you from Allah a light, Noor, a light and a clear book by which Allah guides those who pursue His pleasure to the ways of peace and safety and brings them out from darkness into the light by His permission and guides them to a straight path. So, dear friends, the Quran directs the man, directs, not advise. The Quran directs the man to fight out all types of injustice, tyranny, corruption, to establish justice, equity, peace, and progress in the society. Thus, there is a very strong moral and philosophical support to organize people's power to create deterrence against tyrannical and exploitative systems laid down by the elitist minorities to impede rights of the majorities. To establish, why to fight against the elitists? To establish a faithful, just and progressive society to serve the will of Allah and collective well-being of the humanity. A few verses are presented here to highlight the Quranic message on this subject. Ayat 104 of Surah Al-Imran says, "And let there be arising from you a nation, inviting to all that is good, enjoining what is right and forbidding what is wrong, and those will be the successful." Ayat 39 of Surah Ash-Shura says, "And those who, when tyranny strikes them, they defend themselves." They don't keep silent. They defend themselves. They fight the aggressors. Ayat 73 of Surah Al-Anfal highlights significance of deterrent force to keep enemy in check, in control. The unbelievers are allies of one of another. Unless you do this, there would be fitna, tumult and oppression on earth and great mischief. Some Quranic verses are displayed on the screen for further study. Please note them. Dear friends, to eliminate oppression, tyranny, all types of injustices, inequalities, and disparities, the Quran sets very high standards of justice which provide a legal framework to protect rights of the people and hedge them, protect them against the excesses of the powerful elites. These standards also urge the people to stand together firmly, fearlessly, and forcefully for establishing a just and equitable socio-economic and political system, ensuring maximal collective well-being of the humanity. Some Quranic references are made to highlight these standards and their obligatory pursuance by the Muslims. They are binding on the Muslims. Ayat 135 of Surah An-Nisa says, "O ye who believe," means believers, "stand out firmly for justice as witness to God, even as against yourselves, or your parents, or your kith and kins, and whether it be against rich or poor. For God can best protect both. Follow not the lusts of your hearts, lest ye swerve, and if ye distort justice or decline to do justice, verily God is well acquainted with all that you do." Ayat 8 of Surah Al-Ma'idah says, O you who have believed, means Muslims, be persistently standing firm for Allah, witnesses in justice, and do not let the hatred of a people prevent you. Be just, that is nearer to righteousness, and fear Allah. Indeed, Allah is acquainted with what you do. So, dear friends, history shows that whenever an oppressed party took over its oppressor, it mostly repeated similar aggression against the defeated enemy. To achieve justice against the evil elitist forces, there is need to display restraint and prudence by the people's power to avoid escalation of the struggle into long-drawn crisis. Generally, these crises turn into civil wars, mass-scale human losses, sovereign and geographic disintegrations, etc. In the recent times too, several such situations ended in total disaster. The Arab Spring is the latest such example that represents a series of anti-government protests, uprisings, and armed rebellions that spread across much of the Arab world in the early 2010s, the whole decade of 2010. Thus, people's power need to be disciplined, focused on its well-defined objectives and skilled to maneuver wisely and patiently for available opportunities, knowing its own strengths and weaknesses well. Better if the people's power is kept contained to a peaceful resistance movement. Otherwise, what happens otherwise? Multiple interests, internal and external, penetrate into the arena, vying for opportunities to exploit the already precarious situation to their own advantage and make the crisis irreversible and counterproductive to the originally desired goals. To avoid such predicaments, dilemmas, the Qur'an has prohibited retaliatory actions and advised closing of the crisis with peaceful settlement as detailed in the Quranic references displayed on the screen. So, dear friends, discussion made so far leads to suggest that the concept of destiny or determinism propagated by the politico-religious elites to deprive the people of their abilities of intellectual growth, promotion of knowledge, and innovative pursuits is contrary to the Quranic anti-classic view of growth and progress. Thus, it needs to be discarded to get rid of elitist subjugation, and peoples need to hold captaincy of their destiny and fate in their own hands. They should be captain of their destiny. We should reform our character and conduct to best serve our role as the vicegerent of Allah. This role urges us to stand united for establishing Pakistan as a truly democratic state with inclusive institutions responsive to the people's will, where submission to the sovereignty of Allah, national security, progress, accountable and efficient public services, provision of basic health care, education, and merit-based employment, fair dispensation of justice, equitable and indiscriminate access to economic opportunities, etc., should be the most accredited features of national governance. Recognizing these features as people's basic rights and prime interests, every citizen must force the government to enforce these features. We can dictate people's will by knowing our interests well, preferring them over the political affiliations while voting and monitoring performance of the government. Non-political associations need to be promoted at local and regional levels for sharing information on public matters without political lobbying or influence. Heads of major non-elective state institutions should undergo post-retirement public scrutiny of their conduct during service by a scrutiny committee comprising of the members of provincial assemblies and the parliament to decide maintainability of their titles and entitlements in future. Peoples must remain focused on their interests and how to achieve them. They should be captain of the public affairs, their destiny. For that, democracy is a great blessing and vote a great weapon, provided. Underline my word provided. Provided peoples are conscious of their interests and willing to guard them by all means with wisdom and full vigor they have. So, dear friends, we conclude our discussion here. These programs are recorded both in Urdu and English. Their videos can be watched on ideafoundation.com.pk website or its YouTube web channel and Facebook. Their written versions are also available on the Idea Foundation's website. Please note code number of this program Idea 1B R34 P2 or lecture number 145. All friends are requested to subscribe the Foundation's YouTube web channel for the benefit of this noble cause. Thank you friends for participation. Allah Hafiz.